Yes.
Sabrina, I want to tell you one plant question. So we're seeing everybody in the show and then other. And that's how we're seeing it. What does that mean?
I guess like when other people log on, and this is the chat. So if the chat window open, that's how you get to see all of the panelists
Good afternoon, boys and girls. My name is Sabrina, and I'm here in McAllen, Texas today. What we're going to be talking about? Pollinators in your garden. Okay, so where we're at right now, this is the Discovery Lab at Quinta Mazatlan. Quinta Mazatlan is a mansion with a mission. We are a historic site, and we also do a lot of environmental education for boys and girls just like yourselves. So you might be asking, what are we going to talk about with pollination? So in your gardens at home, you may have some big plants and you may have some little plants. Some of these flowers, like on this lantana, are very, very small, while other flowers are very big. But really, it doesn't matter if the flower is big or if the flower is small. There's a whole lot going on inside that flower. Okay, and we're going to talk about that today. But first, let's talk about the parts of the flower. Come with me. Age of flowers. This is an orchid, right? And what makes a flower a flower? Okay, we have lots of very colorful petals, all right? We have a very centerpiece of the flower that's called the stigma, and we have some other little pieces around the inside of the flower where the pollen is held. Okay, now we might ask ourselves, why do flowers make themselves look so pretty? Do they make them look pretty for us? No. The answer is flowers make themselves look pretty so that they can attract pollinators. This is the inside of a flower. Here is what the inside of a real flower looks like. And over here, we have an illustration. Down in the bottom of the flower, you have an area called the ovary. And in the ovary, that's where the seed is made. This long stalk here on the flower is called the style. So over here, this is the style. And all of these little yellow strings that you see coming up inside the flower, those are called stigmas. Okay? And on the stigmas, I'm sure when you've looked inside of a flower before, you see little bits of yellow. Or maybe when you go outside and the wind is blowing, all of a sudden, you sneeze. Pollen is what makes us sneeze. And pollen is very, very tiny, okay? But that's all the little yellow bits that you see inside the flower. Here's a microscopic picture of a flower. So microscopic means that we just zoomed in on this beautiful hibiscus flower to show you what the pollen grains look like. Now, depending upon the flower, the pollen grains are going to look different. These are the pollen grains of sunflower pollen. You see they have all these little, they look sharp, they look like spines, but they're not. It helps the pollen stick to whatever it wants to get to. Here's a passion flower pollen. And it doesn't have any pokey things, but it sure is sticky. Here's the pollen of morning glory. Cactus pollen. Dandelion pollen. We all know this one, don't we? And some other different kinds of pollen. And all of these pollens are trying to make it to this structure right here. It's called the sticky stigma. Can you say that with me? Sticky stigma. Now here's a picture of a bee, and he's covered in pollen. I bet some of you boys and girls have seen this before, haven't you? Well, let's look at why the bees go into the flowers in the first place. Come with me. Now the flowers need the insects to pollinate. But do you guys think that the insects want to pollinate the flowers, want to help the flowers just for no reason? Just because they want to be nice? No. Actually, the flowers give something to the pollinators that make them want to visit each individual flower. Does anyone know what that is? Well, I'll tell you. If you come in a little closer, it's this right here. Sugar. Now, I'll ask you, boys and girls, if your parents said, I want you to do the chores in the house, and I will give you some broccoli to do. How many would do chores around the house for broccoli? Not many. But you would do it if they wanted to give you something sweet, wouldn't you? Excellent. And that's exactly what these flowers do. You can make your own flower just by having a couple of things. One, you need a straw, and that's going to be the stem of your flower. The second item that you need is a paper cup, just like this. You'll need a pair of scissors, so make sure that you have an adult to help. And you'll also need some pipe cleaners. You can use just one colored pipe cleaner or a couple different colors. What you would do is you wrap the pipe cleaners around, and this is going to be your style on either side. And sometimes you get more than just two styles. Let's make some more styles. Wrap your styles around. And you're going to have lots of styles for your flower. And in the center part of the flower, you have what's called the stigma, the sticky stigma. You put your pipe cleaners in like so, and then your finished product is going to look something like this. Okay, so we've given our flower a little bit of color to the petals. The color and the smell of the flower is what's going to attract the pollinator to come and visit it. And we said that the flowers have nectar. So nectar is that sugar that I talked about. So flowers put their sugar down in the flower so that the pollinator has to go in after it. And while the pollinator is going in after that sugar, the sticky pollen comes off of the style and gets stuck to the pollinator. Now that pollinator is going to leave that flower and travel from another flower to another flower to another flower, the whole time picking up different bits of pollen. Those pollen get deposited in the middle of the flower, right? And the pollen travels all the way down that stigma, down into the ovary of the flower, what we talked about. And that's how the flower makes its seed. Okay? So let's talk about some other pollinators that we have. So pollinators can be butterflies. Pollinators can also be, buzz, 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 bees. So when bees are pollinators, bees visit thousands of flowers in a single day. And did you know that bees can actually remember which flowers they've been to? I don't know if I could remember every single grocery store I've ever been to, but the bee would come up to the flower. It smells the nectar and it wants that sugary treat. So it goes and it starts to drink the nectar, and as it's drinking the nectar, remember we said that pollen is very sticky. So it sticks to that bee. Do you all remember what that bee looks like that's covered in the pollen? So the bee gets covered in pollen. Now he goes from flower to flower and he gets more and more pollen on him, and as he's flying, he leaves one flower, travels over the landscape, maybe he travels over the water, and he gets to another flower. And at that flower, he's going to get, again, he's going to pick up his nectar, but while he's in there, some of his pollen gets stuck on the flower, and that pollen follows all the way down into the ovary of the flower. Okay? So we know it's the color of the flowers that attract our pollinators, and it's also that sugary nectar that they get to have. And that's why pollinators visit flowers. What other types of pollinators are there? Let's explore. We already talked about butterflies, and we definitely know that bees visit flowers, but we also have other types of insects that visit flowers too. One of them is this. It's a beetle. Another type of pollinator that flies is lech, a housefly. Houseflies are pollinators also. Moths can also be pollinators. And did you know that some flowers that open up just at night are flowering specifically for moths? That's right. At night, moths come over to the flower and visit it, take a drink of nectar, and continue to go. We also have wasps. Wasps are another flying pollinator. So pollen can move by being stuck to pollinators, or sometimes it can move just by wind, or water can even pick up pollen and carry it to another place. But there's one more a winged pollinator that we haven't talked about yet. Can you guess what it is? I knew you could. That's right. It's a hummingbird. Hummingbirds are wonderful at collecting the nectar from flowers because they have this amazing beak that acts like a straw. So they simply dip their beak down into the flower to take a drink and visit another flower. And while they're doing this, they're picking up the pollen. It sticks maybe to their feathers a little bit to the top of their heads. And every time they poke their head in there, some of that pollen is coming off and getting into that flower, right where it needs to be. Did you know that hummingbirds can flap their wings up to 100 times a second? Can you imagine moving that fast? I can't. So now that we know how the pollen gets to the flower and where the pollen goes once it's in the flower, let's talk about what the plant does with that pollen to make sure that it can reproduce and make another plant. Let's go on to our next table. So one thing that plants make is seeds. Has anyone ever eaten a sunflower seed before? I have. Well, sunflower seeds and any other seeds or fruit and vegetables that you eat are possible because of pollinators. Let's look at some of the different ways that plants protect their seeds, okay? Here we have sunflower seeds. Sunflower seeds have a hard black casing on the outside. But if we were to break one of these open, you would see a very soft interior, and that is the seed right there, okay? So when that seed gets into the ground, you'll have another sunflower grow. Some seeds, like this legume, does anyone else like to eat beans? Because I do. Some seeds like this legume protect their seeds in pods. And we can open up our pods and extract the tasty seed. And there's the seed for the legume. Now, legumes and sunflowers, they're edible for us. And some other vegetables and fruits that you might all be familiar with are also edible for people and only possible because of pollinators and the fruit that the plants make. Now, being down here in McAllen, Texas, we're close to the border, and one thing that's really delicious down here to have is peppers. Peppers, or chiles, right? We have red peppers and yellow peppers. And if you've ever seen your mom open up a pepper before, you'll notice that there are seeds on the inside. A lot of seeds, right? Other really delicious foods that we eat that also have seeds in them are tomatoes. So these are good in chili and salsa. I love tomatoes. One of the last ones is strawberries. Now, who doesn't like strawberries? And for strawberries, you can actually see the seeds embedded just on the outside of the berry. Can you see that? All these little tiny seeds. Make sure you floss after you eat strawberries, kids. Now, why might a plant put its seeds into something that's so tasty, something that's delicious? Let's see. Well, I have an idea. I think it might be the right one. Just like the plant wants to get its pollen from flower to flower, it gives the pollinators that nectar. So that's the reason that the pollinators want to visit. But then the plant has another problem. If you have all these seeds, how do you get all these seeds into the ground? Well, sometimes the fruit just gets old and rots and falls to the ground, and it might just make a plant right there. But if you want your seeds and babies to go off somewhere else, I would put my seeds in delicious foods that other animals are going to eat, and then travel and deposit the seeds somewhere else. Some other animals that help the seeds once they get into the soil we have here with us today. So in here, some of you might be grossed out, but you shouldn't. We have this little guy, and this is called a grub, and he is alive. Grubs hang out in the soil, and they help aerate it, which means they help make the soil really nice and healthy for all the plants that want to grow into it. Another animal that I brought with us for today is this beetle, and I think he might have been asleep, but we're gonna wake him up. Okay, now this beetle, once he's grown and he's in the soil, he's down in the dirt and moving it around, continuing to aerate it, and he does something for these plants that the animals also help with. So if you're an animal and you eat a delicious strawberry, and then you move to the next field, or you walk a few miles away from that plant that you just ate, and you make a deposit, right? So your seed goes down onto the ground, and then different kinds of beetles that like what you just put your seed into will help break it down. And what these guys do is not only do they help break down the fecal matter, but they help make it so that seed is gonna grow big and strong. Okay, now let's move on to understand, we've explained why plants need pollinators, right? But now let's talk about why pollinators need plants, why insects need to have plants. We're going to do that by focusing on some butterflies. So, when butterflies are first laid, they're laid as an egg. From their egg stage, the eggs hatch, and then you have a caterpillar. Now, do any of you boys and girls have a baby brother or sister? They eat a lot, don't they? And just like a baby brother or sister, these caterpillars are hungry. And whatever plant their parents lay them on, whatever plant the egg is laid on, that's going to be the plant that that caterpillar eats to grow big and strong. Now, once you're a caterpillar and you start eating your plant, eventually what you're going to make is something called a chrysalis. A chrysalis is what the caterpillar wraps around himself, turns himself into to turn into a butterfly. And a chrysalis is going to hang from the leaf of your plant, going to hang from the leaf of the plant, just like so. And once that chrysalis opens, you would get a butterfly. Now, when you're a butterfly, you don't want just any plant. It has to be specific for your needs. So the first butterfly we'll talk about will be the Mexican bluewing, okay? And you guys can go ahead and make butterflies at home if you want to. All you would need is to get a cutout of a Mexican bluewing, right? Have your parents help you with cutting around the edges. And then we're gonna go ahead and color it in. So this is a Mexican bluewing butterfly. Okay, very beautiful. And we really only find these butterflies where their plants exist. Which makes sense because you have to have the food that you like to grow big and strong. We wouldn't last for very long if we couldn't go to an H-E-B or to a Publix or to Piggly Wiggly or any of those other stores, right? Walmart or anywhere to get our food. So now that you have your butterfly colored, what you can do is you can take a paper punch and just make a punch on either side of the butterfly. There you go. So I've done my holes on just either side of the body of the butterfly. And then I'm going to take, again, just a piece of pipe cleaner, which is really handy to have around. You can get it at any arts and crafts store. And you put your pipe cleaner through, and then we all know that butterflies have really pretty antennas, right? So we're gonna go ahead and just kind of twist around to make our little antennas. And there, I'm gonna put them on my finger. So now, my Mexican bluewing butterfly is going to visit his favorite plant, which is called his host plant, which happens to be this plant right here. It's called the Vasi Adelia. Vasi Adelia. So if you're living in Texas and you want to have Mexican bluewings, make sure you get your hands on some of this plant. So what this butterfly does is he goes to his host plant and he says, "This is my plant," and he lays his eggs on the leaves. Now when the leaves hatch, or when the eggs hatch, they turn into caterpillars. The caterpillars start to eat the leaves, right? They eat the leaves until they are old enough to make that chrysalis. And from the chrysalis, when the chrysalis hatches, that's where you get your butterfly. That's where the life cycle completes. Now, there might be some butterflies that you guys really remember really well because you've probably seen them down here in the valley, and that's called the monarch butterfly. And monarch butterflies, their host plant is called milkweed. And this is a milkweed right here. The leaves are just a little bit rough. And when you break the leaves or break some of the stem, you get this milky sap that comes out. Well, other insects don't like the sap because it's kind of toxic. But butterflies eat it, and it makes monarch butterflies taste really bad. So birds don't want to eat them. That's a good way to stay safe, isn't it? Let's look at the number of butterflies, monarchs, that we used to have. Just about 12 years ago, we had 1 billion monarch butterflies traveling between Canada, through the US, and down into Mexico to overwinter. But now, this is how many monarch butterflies are left. Only about 33 million. You might ask yourself, why do we have so few monarch butterflies now? And I'll tell you, it's because they don't have enough food for themselves, for their babies, to lay their eggs on. So if you want to have monarchs, if you want to save the monarch, what you need to do is you need to go to your local plant store, your native plant nursery, and ask them what kind of native milkweed is good for your area. And you want to plant that in your yard. When you plant native milkweed, you'll continue the cycle for the butterflies. The butterflies will continue to make all that good food for us, those strawberries, those peppers, and those tomatoes that we saw. Because without pollinators, we wouldn't have anything to eat either. Once you start adding all these different plants, these nectar plants, to your house, to your garden, you're not only going to see more hummingbirds and bees and butterflies, but you'll also start to see other animals, because other animals may like to chomp on some of these plants, and they also provide good cover for small animals like rabbits, chipmunks, squirrels, and it's all a cycle, isn't it? So, does anyone have any questions for me today?
There is a question. It says, can we drink the milk in milkweed?
Can we drink the milk in milkweed? That's the question. And I'm going ahead and tell you, boys and girls, that no, you do not want to drink the milk that's in milkweed plants. The reason that monarch butterflies eat the milkweed is because that milk, that milky sap that's in it, is very toxic. So you don't ever want to eat it, put it in your mouth. In fact, I'll go a step further and I'll say you don't ever want to eat a plant that you find outside unless you're with an adult and the adults can positively identify that that plant is a safe edible. Does anyone have any other questions?
Yes, this question just came in. Does every plant make a flower?
Does every plant make a flower? That's a good question. And the answer is no, not every plant makes a flower, but every plant makes a seed. That might seem a little confusing, but if you guys think about your forests, in particular, think about some of our trees, like pine trees. Pine trees don't make flowers, but they make big cones, and the cones are seeds. So they reproduce by making those seeds, and those seeds just drop off to make more trees somewhere else. So sometimes those cones get blown off, and sometimes they just fall right to the ground. Do we have any other questions?
This question came in from Aaron. How do butterflies get their color?
How do butterflies get their color? Depending upon the species of butterfly, I would imagine that color would be impacted by the habitat that a butterfly lives in, by the species of the butterfly, and probably by what the butterfly is eating. After all, we are what we eat, aren't we? Does anyone have any more questions?
Are other types of butterflies dying out in the United States?
Are other types of butterflies dying out in the United States? Besides the monarch butterfly, at this time, no. There are no other butterflies that are dying out. So make sure you help your monarch butterfly. More questions?
What about getting stung by a bee in your pollinator garden?
Getting stung by a bee in your pollinator garden. Well, bees are just like other animals when it comes to protecting their babies. So really, a bee's only going to sting you if you get close to its nest, close to its babies, right? Bees aren't going to sting you if they're just taking a drink of their nectar. In fact, one of the directors right here at Quinta Mazatlan has been out in the garden before when bees are visiting flowers and put her hand near them and they don't sting her. But if you're allergic to bees, you should generally stay away from them. Does that answer your question?
This question comes from Karen. Where do butterflies go when it's cold? We live in Illinois.
Ah, yes. Where do butterflies go when it's cold? If you live in Illinois, I'm originally from Wisconsin, but you know what happens when birds get cold? What they do is they fly south. And that's what monarch butterflies do. Monarch butterflies will fly south for the winter. But other butterflies do something that's called pupate. So they actually go down into the ground. They burrow into the soil to stay warm in the ground during the winter months. Any more questions?
This question comes from Aaron. Does that beetle bite humans, that rhinoceros beetle?
That rhinoceros beetle? It's a good question because he does look a little bit scary, doesn't he? But the answer is no, he doesn't bite humans. He's more interested in the nutrients that are in the soil. Any other questions? No? Fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming and visiting me here in McAllen, Texas today at the Discovery Lab at Quinta Mazatlan. We'll see you again real soon. Bye.
Questions.
Okay, guys, we heard that all of you had some more questions. And one good question that just came in was asked, what would happen if pollinators go extinct? That's a great question. Let's go back over to our food source here. Oh, and my little rhinoceros beetle needs to get back in his house. There you go, buddy. There. He just wants to dig and be buried and be happy. So if pollinators go extinct, we're not going to have that transfer of pollen from flower to flower to flower, unless one of us wants to go out and do it. But I think that would be really small work for some humans, wouldn't it? And that would take way too long. So we absolutely have to have pollinators. If we didn't have pollinators, we wouldn't have people, because we wouldn't have fruits and vegetables like these tomatoes, like these peppers, or these strawberries. But there's other fruits that we wouldn't have either. We wouldn't have oranges, we wouldn't have apples, and we would really go hungry, wouldn't we? Because not only do we eat these fruits and vegetables, but other animals do too that we might eat. Maybe deer, or elk, or bison, or whatever it is that you consume. Do we have more questions?
There was one last question. How do you know so much?
How do I know so much? Well, I'll tell you, I went to college in central Wisconsin at a university called Stevens Point. and it was one of the best experiences I ever had. So if any of you boys and girls are thinking about going to college, I would recommend following your passion for environmental resources and the natural world. I recommend make sure you go to school and you study real hard, and then you can help each other. Great. Any more questions? That's it? Fantastic. All right, you guys have a great day.